Hi, I'm Dr. Felice Gersh, your integrative OBGYN. Have you thought about the issue of weight gain and hormone therapy in peri and menopausal years? Well, many have. In fact, it is one of the most common issues that's brought up to me. There's so much concern about weight gain, and that is not without merit. Because around the perimenopausal years, even years before actual menopause, defined as 12 consecutive months without any vaginal bleeding, during those years preceding that final period, the vast majority of women will gain weight, and not weight that you want, belly fat, the visceral fat, the kind that creates inflammation, as well as, of course, emotional distress and loss of self-esteem. This is not a small problem, and it really heralds in the onset of this huge metabolic shift that occurs with the loss of those vital life hormones, estradiol and progesterone. But let's talk about what is really happening. Many patients I see say they were started on hormones by another physician and they gained weight. Well, I am definitely not going to deny that they gained weight. They know how to get on a scale and check the number. But what kind of weight is it? If they didn't have a body composition, which we do in my office, but it's not really commonly done, then you don't really know what is that weight. Is it fluid? Is it fat? Where is the fat located? Is it muscle? Well, it turns out that in the vast majority of cases, it is fluid, extracellular fluid, which makes someone feel puffy and their clothes don't fit properly. They can't necessarily close the buttons around their waist and so on. Now, why would that be? Typically, it is because they are simply not being given optimal hormone in terms of doses and regimens. Well, let's talk about what effect estradiol and other estrogens as well. Remember, estrogen is not a hormone, it's a family of hormones. The type made by the ovaries is called E2, estradiol. And progesterone. Well, some people are not given real progesterone either. They're given a fake, what's called a progestin. So depending on the hormones that are prescribed, you can have very, very different effects. But as a general statement, estrogens cause fluid retention, and progesterone is more like a diuretic. It will cause fluid to be lost by having urination, by getting it out that way. So if you are given, for example, the wrong form of estrogen, say an oral pill or a troche, which people think it's getting all absorbed under their tongue, almost none of it gets absorbed that way. Basically, you're swallowing it. It's just like a pill, only in liquid form. You're swallowing it. It's an oral delivery system. When you take estradiol, orally, it gets converted through the liver into estrone. And estrone operates differently. It's a different estrogen, and it does not give a balanced effect on all the hormone receptors for estrogen. It primarily binds to the alpha receptor, which creates more inflammation. That's the last thing anyone wants as they're heading into menopause is more inflammation, because just going through the menopausal transition creates inflammation, gut dysbiosis, abnormal gut microbiomes leading to leaky gut, creating more inflammation. Guess what inflammation causes? Insulin resistance. And when you have insulin resistance, you put on weight, because insulin, which is a vital hormone, you can't live without it. But if you have too much of it or it's not working properly, it promotes fat production and storage. So if you have no hormones on board or lowered levels because you're transforming yourself as your ovaries are aging into a peri and then a menopausal woman, you will gain weight almost 100% of the time. And if you're very thin, the weight may not be very obvious, but it's there. It's internal in your viscera. around your internal organs. And if you do a body composition, you'll see that you're losing vital muscle mass and putting on visceral fat. In fact, your clothes may feel differently even if your weight stays the same. For most women, they're not so thin, and they can see it. They can see their bellies are rounding, they're losing their cute little waistlines, and it's all that pro-inflammatory visceral and belly fat. Now, why is that even happening? Well, it turns out that estradiol, which has the balanced effect on all the estrogen receptors, works to keep your metabolic systems humming beautifully. So, for example, thyroid. It turns out that thyroid glands have estrogen receptors for estradiol. And so without adequate amounts of estradiol, guess what happens? You won't produce thyroid properly. And of course, everyone knows that the thyroid hormone, levothyroxine, T4, is the metabolic metabolizer. Okay, it keeps you burning fat. Everyone says, I may have a slow metabolism, check my thyroid. Well, the last thing you want is low thyroid, or what else? Estradiol also modulates the thyroid receptors. So without adequate estradiol on board, you're going to not have proper receptor function. So the thyroid gland won't work as well, and the thyroid receptors for the thyroid hormone also won't work as well. So essentially, it's like you are low in thyroid, hypothyroid. Well, if you read the Dr. Google, you'll see low thyroid is associated with weight gain and a whole bunch of other symptoms. Well, estradiol also is the appetite regulator. So many women, as they transition into menopause, lose appetite control. They get cravings and often will develop binging, like that bag of chips just calls your name and you try and try not to eat it. You finally give up, eat it, and then feel terrible. Or it could be a tub of ice cream or whatever. Well, it turns out that estradiol modulates appetite through a variety of mechanisms. In terms of fat tissue, the adipose tissue, makes hormones called adipokines. One of them is called leptin. When you have high amounts of leptin, it suppresses, when it's working properly, it suppresses appetite. Well, leptin is modulated or regulated by estradiol. And in your brain, you also make little neuropeptides, like the one that's so famous now that is mimicked by drugs like Ozempic, GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1. That's actually made in your brain and helps regulate appetite so you don't have dysregulated, out-of-control appetite. It also is made in special gut lining cells called enterocytes. And those little cells make GLP-1 in the presence of estradiol. So you need to have that for the production of this really important little peptide that helps to modulate appetite and also helps to control the function of insulin. Well, it turns out that as well, estradiol controls what are called the glucose transport system, how glucose is transported from the blood into the cells that need it for energy. If those glucose transport systems are not properly working, you end up having too much glucose, sugar, circulating in your blood, which causes your pancreas to make more insulin. Now you know, insulin is the hormone that helps to promote the production and storage of fat. So you don't want that. You don't want higher glucose circulating and then higher amounts of your insulin, because if you have high insulin, it's going to convert all that glucose into fat, and not fat that's in the subcutaneous tissues, but rather visceral fat. Because estradiol, if you are young or you have plenty of hormones on board, it doesn't mean you can't gain weight. There are plenty of young women who have plenty of natural hormones. Their ovaries are working, but they still get overweight. Well, you can override any system if you actually eat all the wrong foods and you live all the wrong lifestyle and you're full of endocrine disruptors. But even if you do everything right, but you overeat eat. You take in way too many calories, even if they're from good healthy foods. If you over consume, you will put on additional fat. But if you have enough estradiol on board, the fat will go to where? The typical fat storage sites of healthy women, butts and hips and breasts, as opposed to the belly. Now, I'm not saying everyone wants to have a Rubenesque figure, but that's what you'll get if you overeat, but you have enough estradiol. And that's not necessarily aesthetically pleasing to those of us today, but it's not really terribly unhealthy because that kind of fat doesn't create inflammation, unlike belly fat. Belly fat and visceral fat gets infiltrated with the immune cells that create tremendous amounts of inflammation. Well, what else does estradiol do that's so important for weight control? Well, it works in the gut to maintain a healthy gut barrier. Without adequate estradiol, you're going to get into problems with dysbiosis, the wrong gut microbiome population, leading to leaky gut. Then you have the contents of the intestinal tract passing through the lining cells into the body proper, and with all the junk coming in, what we call endotoxins or lipopolysaccharides, it ignites the immune cells that line the gut. There's lots of them. That's where 70% of the immune system is placed, creating inflammation that circulates throughout the body. And as I told you, inflammation leads to insulin resistance. High levels of insulin leads to production of fat and storage of fat. You almost cannot ever lose weight. You can't lose weight if you have high circulating levels of insulin. So it's really, really complex. But there's even more to it. Estradiol modulates the function of mitochondria. Mitochondria are the little structures in cells that create energy. Without proper amounts of estradiol, that's the kind from the ovaries, E2, you cannot burn fat or glucose properly. The electron transport chain that creates ATP, that's energy, that won't work properly. As well, when you create energy, you in the mitochondria, you also create a metabolic byproduct that is two oxygens together called superoxide. This superoxide is poison to the mitochondria. You got to get rid of it or it'll destroy the mitochondria. Without mitochondria, you can't create energy. You also can't burn fat. You can't lose weight if you don't have mitochondria. So estradiol actually modulates the enzyme called manganese superoxide dismutase that turns that toxic superoxide into hydrogen peroxide, which can diffuse out of the mitochondria into the cell where it's converted into harmless water. So you got to have that estradiol to burn the fat. Otherwise, you end up like many women, a sea of energy, lots of fat, but you can't burn it. It's like being in an ocean full of water, but it's all salty and you can't drink it. So it's so important to have all the proper amounts of estradiol. Now, when some women take hormone therapy in menopause, they say, but I'm gaining weight. I'm listening to you, Dr. Gersh. You're telling me how important these hormones are, but what's happening? And you know, maybe it's not all fluid. Maybe it isn't. Well, how can that be? Or they'll say, my appetite is so dysregulated and I'm taking hormones. How can this be? Well, once again, what hormones are you taking and what regimen are you getting them in? If you're taking any form of oral estrogen, whether it's a troche or a pill, it is not getting into your body as estradiol. It's getting in as estrone. Estrone is estrogen, different from estradiol, and it is pro-inflammatory. You don't want a lot of estrone. We want some. Estrone is not evil, but you need the right amount at the right time. Only nature can figure that out when it takes a healthy quantity of estradiol, which can be converted naturally into some estrone as the body wants it. So estrone, I'm not demonizing estrone, but you want it only when it's converted properly by the body from estradiol. So this is really important. Now, many women are not only getting estrogen delivered in the wrong route, they're getting the wrong amount. The dose matters. If you have a very small amount, it's actually not anti-inflammatory. In fact, the menstrual cycle is the perfect example of some of the things I'm going to tell you right now. In a normal, healthy, reproductive age woman, when she has a menstrual cycle, the estradiol is very low during the period. It's not zero, but it's quite low. Many women in menopause are given estradiol levels that are the same as that. That's not going to be anti-inflammatory. That's not going to do the things you want it to do to optimize metabolism, thyroid, gut health, the peptides in the brain and in the gut. None of that's going to happen properly because the level that's created is simply too low. So you've got to get a dose in to actually create the proper effect. And there's so much fear, and still is, about estrogen. And remember, the motto that came out after the Women's Health Initiative was the smallest dose for the shortest period. Oh my gosh, I can just pull my hair out every time I think of how many women were harmed by that. Well, it's not the lowest dose, but still so many doctors are prescribing really small doses, and the women, they don't know that they're getting an inadequate dose. And so they're not getting the proper effect. It's like they're on smoke and mirrors dose. It's not creating the proper effect. And if you have very small amounts, it's like you're during the period time, and it's not going to be helpful. And that's why it's really important to have a level that's more middling, as far as like at the upper end of the follicular level that's produced, or more like sort of somewhere towards the luteal phase, but not way down low at the time of the period. Now, that level only stays low in a normal cycling woman for just a very few days. And what about during the luteal phase? That's the time from ovulation to the period. That's the time when a normal cycling woman in the reproductive years will make progesterone along with the estradiol. Remember, a cycling woman only makes progesterone for 2 weeks, and yet many doctors are prescribing estradiol and progesterone every day. No woman ever in her lifetime would naturally be doing that. That's not ever possible. She would never make progesterone every day. Well, it turns out that progesterone downregulates estrogen, the receptors. So the estrogen becomes less effective. Remember, it doesn't matter how much food you have if you can't get it in your mouth because somebody duct tapes your mouth closed and you can't get the tape off. Having hormones doesn't help if they can't get into the receptor and activate the receptor. Progesterone doesn't turn off the receptors, it downregulates the receptors. And that is all about reproduction. We're not going to go into all of the why that would be, but if you give progesterone all the time with the estradiol, even if you're getting transdermal estradiol, you're actually somewhat deactivating that estradiol. And also, usually the dose of the estradiol is too low. So basically, once again, smoke and mirrors. Of course you're gaining weight. You're not on an adequate amount of estradiol. And think about women during the luteal phase. There's a fair number of women that have PMS, premenstrual syndrome. And during that time, many women have cravings and binges. Why is that? That second half of that menstrual cycle, a lot of women don't feel optimal because they're having PMS symptoms, which can include bloating, some fluid retention, they're not feeling right, they're having appetite dysregulation. That's because of the way that the hormones between the progesterone and the estradiol are interacting, and the progesterone is affecting the estrogen receptors. So it's complex, and obviously not every woman has that kind of an issue, but that is what we don't want to create. We don't want to give women hormones in the perimenopause and menopausal years that recreates PMS. Of course not. So when you go on hormones, you have to get an adequate serum, not saliva. That's not yet validated. Don't go with saliva. We need to get an adequate level in the blood, and it needs to be in the range of towards 100, at least over 50, and it could be 100 up to 150, could even be a little higher. You just want to see also what the life effect is on the uterine lining to see if you're creating what seems like a normal type of period. That's a biological assay of effect. That's actually a very good marker of how things are going. When you have normal hormones, when you have adequate estradiol, it modulates appetite, keeps your thyroid working, makes your gut right. It keeps insulin working properly, glucose transporters, mitochondria, thyroid. It keeps all the metabolic processes. I didn't even get into another adipokine, another hormone made by fat tissue called adiponectin, which creates fat burning, is modulated, regulated also by estradiol. I mean, we could go on because, I sing the praises of estradiol all the time. Nature did not give us these hormones to give us belly fat. That is what happens when you lose it. And you need to get on this quickly. I wish I could go back in time for myself and many other women to when we're just beginning those perimenopausal years of transitioning, when our hormone levels are dropping, because during the perimenopause, the vast majority of women will gain visceral fat. And not only that, lose muscle mass, because it's all about body composition. And if you lose muscle mass, which is what happens, most people don't know estradiol supports muscle. You get loss of muscle called sarcopenia, and muscle is the tissue of the body that burns fats and sugars. Without adequate muscle, you will be more prone to diabetes, high insulin. Insulin causes fat production and storage. You've got to maintain your muscle mass and androgens. So I am getting so much more into androgens than I ever had before. I do measure them and I do treat with them because androgens also matter. DHEAS, and then we give DHEA, and testosterone. But they are not related to menopause. They are separate. So you may or may not need them, but it's not a menopausal hormone transformation like it is with estradiol and progesterone. And we'll talk much more about all of these things. But the takeaway is loss of hormones, estradiol and progesterone, they go together, they balance one another, is associated with weight gain and not good weight, not good visceral fat, and loss of vital muscle. Giving hormones back properly will help prevent this. And maybe, and we have not a lot of data on this, with adding exercise in, that vital medicine, exercise, can help to reverse it. We know you can lose visceral fat. It's a lot of work. Of course, prevention is the best medicine, but if you already got there, you already got it, don't despair. We do have ways to help you lose that visceral fat. We'll be talking more about that in the future too. So don't demonize hormones. They're your best buddies. I really mean it. You take care.